Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. This is episode 21. I am Nerd Slayer, your host, and on this week's podcast we will be talking a bit about Apex Legends during the current gaming topics section. We will also talk about Disney saying it's never been good at games, and so they're just happy with EA's performance with the Star Wars license. On the MMOs on the Go segment, we'll talk a bit about there'll be some memes in the MMO segment, but we'll also talk about what drives player retention in regards to massive multiplayer online games. We'll talk a bit about Riot sort of confirming, maybe not confirming, that there's not a Riot MMORPG coming. Other things on the podcast, as someone would say, housekeeping. Card is in the podcast lobby. If anybody has a question they'd like to ask me for later on during the call-in segment, you can either just leave the question with him if you don't have the time to stay near the end, or if you can't get in voice and ask it and he can just send it to me, or you can just wait until the call-in segment, join the podcast lobby, and then ask me a question near the end. Okay. So I guess we can go ahead and talk about Apex Legends. First off, what is up, everybody? Hello. The heck, where is my sub? Oh, thanks for the resub, Goosey B. I appreciate that. Okay, so Apex Legends, for those who haven't been following or have been following, I'm not sure. It's we covered it actually. We covered the teaser trailer on the podcast, I remember. Thank you for the bit donation, Goosey. I appreciate that. So we talked about Apex Legends and we showed a bit of a teaser, which was like basically nothing. A little bit of backstory on it. Apex Legends is a new free-to-play title from Respawn Entertainment. Respawn Entertainment, of course, is the company behind, or developers rather, behind the Titanfall series. This is, according to according to Respawn, this is a game that had no EA involvement. Obviously, there's EA involvement. I just think they mean maybe in regards to like design, or maybe they mean semantically. I'm not exactly sure, but they're trying to kind of distance themselves away from Electronic Arts and say, like, this is more of our own project. But otherwise, why that's an important thing is that for those who followed Titanfall or followed Respawn Entertainment, they've had a lot of issues because of EA. Titanfall's been weird because Titanfall's one of those games where it's almost a victim of its stable. And what I mean by that is that it's sort of stuck under the EA umbrella, which means that it ends up getting kind of like banged around whenever it has to go up against other EA IPs. Obviously, the most famous example of this is in the second game, Titanfall 2. It was released the same week that Battlefield was released. And the same week, I think Far Cry or one other shooter was released that week as well. So Titanfall 2, although a good game, had to go up against with a game with, you know, a budget 10 times its amount, with a franchise way more popular. And Titanfall 1, I think they segregated their population, which is not the best word to use here, but they separated their population by expansion. And in the expansion, I think it was like I don't know if it was a playlist or if it was just like if you had the expansion, you couldn't play with people who didn't have the expansion. So that's kind of common in some games. But that ends up obviously ruining your population online and ruining your player base because it kind of fragments it, which is never necessarily a good thing. Anyway, that being said, that's a little bit of history about Respawn. Apex Legends is a BR game, a battle royale game, which is a little bit different than maybe Titanfall is, right? Titanfall is more about mechs and more about just straight up death matches and objective gameplay. But Apex Legends kind of does it differently in the sense that it's not a traditional game, traditional BR, and that it focuses on different things in particular. For example, the main focus in Apex Legend is your squad, which is it's interesting because we should talk another BR, right? Because there's so many BRs out there. I get it. We get tired of all of these BRs. But I get tired of games not because they're of a same genre, but because they seem like the same game. Like, for example, when new MMOs come out, I don't blame them all or label them all as MMOs, therefore I don't like them. I have to look at the particular game and see, you know, what's it trying to do, blah, 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 blah. In this particular case, with a game like Apex Legends, it is a BR, but it's not a traditional BR. Like, it's one of those games that it realizes when it comes to team-based games that one of the hardest things about team-based games is making people want to be interactive with their teammates, because they feel kind of maybe like their teammate's going to judge them. They don't want to get shit talked by their teammate. Obviously, MOBAs are a perfect example of this. League of Legends didn't have voice chat for the longest time because of toxicity concerns and whatever else. Apex Legends was just like, all right, we know solo queue experiences are usually not so great, and we know that these games heavily rely on squad-based gameplay, usually at the competitive levels. So why not just focus on making squad-to-squad gameplay as good as we possibly can, right? And by doing that, or to do that, they had to focus on commands, pings in the game. There's a lot of different ping systems in the games. You can tell people where items are at. You can tell people where enemies are. By the way, I played the game for those who weren't here in the very beginning. I did play the game. Basically, the ping system allows for you to speak to your teammate without actually having to speak to them, which is interesting because it kind of, in a weird way, for people who ultimately like to communicate, they're going to communicate. But for people who maybe wouldn't communicate, period, maybe wouldn't turn in their mic or plug in their mic, at least now they can communicate. And so I think that it's okay to do the same thing, like the same idea, like as a genre, like a battle royale game, as long as you can invent the genre or innovate the genre and do something kind of unique. I think them focusing on the squad gameplay and you kind of interacting as a squad with these special abilities that kind of complement each other, I think that's probably the best way to go about it, in my experience. So that we shouldn't blanket obviously hate things. I say this all the time. Like, BRs, we shouldn't just automatically hate them because they're BRs. We should hate new BRs because they're just like the old BRs. So it's the same thing with MMOs, right? I don't hate theme park MMOs. I just hate that theme park MMOs seem to all like amalgamate to the exact same like formula, you know? Like they all end up being, you know, E equals MC squared. Like it's just like they always end up being the same exact thing. And it's because kind of like the limitations of that business model and of that design model, but also of the market in general. Talking MMOs here. Sorry, drawing a parallel a little bit here between kind of the BR genre being kind of repetitive and MMO genre having that same problem for a bit. Theme park MMOs being the end-all be-all. Yeah, I know. That is a Pepe Hands moment right there. Okay. Yeah, so anyway, to tie it back into Apex Legends, they've been doing amazing. They've already had 10 million players play the game and surpassed 1 million concurrent. This is obviously like incredible numbers. And one thing echoed in near unison is from the fan base and from critics like myself, you're seeing us be rather positive about it. Again, even though it's a BR. It's because, first off, it's a pretty decent BR. Like, I wouldn't say it's great yet because I haven't played enough to, like, deem it great, but it seems pretty fun so far. But it's because of Respawn. Like, many of us who've covered Respawn or covered Titanfall before, we see them as, like, they trip at the finish line. Like, they're that company that they always end up tripping at the finish line. And those are always the most, like Troika comes to mind. The companies that trip at the finish line, where they just miss a couple details, bad circumstances, whatever else, those are the companies that we really feel bad whenever they shut down. And Respawn Entertainment's had some really crazy things happen to them along their journey of developing games, although all the while they've been making pretty decent games. They've never really made bad games before. And so with Apex Legends, everybody's kind of happy, and you see like critics in near unison kind of echoing like the sentiments of like, hey, I'm glad that they're getting success, even if it is a BR. And that's sort of because, like, Titanfall, it's such an unfortunate title because it's not a bad game at all, any stretch of the imagination. If anything, it should be up there with, like, Killzone in terms of its, like, comparisons and maybe even, like, notoriety. But it's never going to have that Killzone notoriety because look at when Killzone came out. It came out and it dominated the PS2 or the PS3. And that was, like, the PS shooter, you know? And Titanfall was released like too closely to its competition by its own publisher, so it was almost like cannibalized by its own publisher. it was really strange, the story of Titanfall. So I think that's why it's cool and interesting to see Apex Legends come so far from that point of essentially starting as this idea this company had maybe as a saving grace of sorts, because, you know, with Titanfall 2 probably not doing as well as it should have done, I don't know how much in danger Respawn would have been. EA doesn't just, like, if you're under the EA like stable, like as a subsidiary or something, or like you work within them, they don't normally fold those companies very quickly. But I mean, they're also not going to let a company keep making games that aren't going to satisfy their expectations, obviously. Like, just not a leap of logic, but pretty simple to expect that. Other things about Apex Legends, besides it getting its 10 million players and over 1 million in concurrent, is it actually was doing really, really well on Twitch as well this week. Of course, any of you who watch Twitch sporadically like I do, you probably noticed this. Apparently, I just posted an article in the chat, but apparently they had... here, I'll just read the article. Since it blah, 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 it says... Apex Legends has consistently been on the top of the Twitch viewing chart, drawing in numbers that have been way higher than Fortnite's over that same time span. Despite having over 600,000 less total hours streamed than Fortnite in the past 7 days, Apex Legends incredibly has almost 11 million more total hours watched. Apex had an average viewership of 183,089 over that time, nearly 70,000 more than the 115,000 average viewer count of Fortnite. As for peak viewership, apparently Apex topped off at 491,000, which is pretty damn impressive. That's almost 500,000, while Fortnite's max viewer count reached 326. Okay, so let's dig into this data here first. First, I'll say, obviously, that's good to see if you like Apex Legends and you wanted something fresh in the market, and you certainly wanted something done by maybe a little bit more kind of boots on ground approach with Apex Legends, which I know there are characters that have abilities to travel and whatever else, but generally speaking, that game feels like it's like a boots on the ground game. These numbers are fantastic. Let's just get that out of the way. But we need to be careful when making these snap kind of judgments. And, you know, of course, somebody like me is the person to say this, because this is essentially the kind of content that I do now for a living. It's post-mortem content. We always get to look at games or companies that kind of celebrated their victories a little bit too early. Now, this is an article not from Apex Legends or the developers at Respawn, so it's just speculation from somebody else, but I'm just going to talk about kind of like the dangers of that kind of speculation. Think about it in this way. Apex just came out about a week ago, and whenever it peaked at 491,000 people. That's a lot of people. Now think about this. Fortnite had 326,000, which, you know, I can't do the math off the top of my head, but it's at least 25% more, right? Like at least a 25% difference. Now, that 25% difference could be entirely accounted for by the fact that Apex is just a new game. See what I'm saying? Like, there's no way to know unless we actually study it, unless we actually have someone run the statistics and do a study over time. It's not as simple as just being like, well, this number is larger than this number, because the thing that you often see on Twitch is you see a game performs really, really well, of course, in its first week, first month, first 2-3 months, right? A Realm Royale comes to mind. What's the other one that comes to mind? Battle Right blew up for a bit. Couple other examples, but a couple of these multiplayer titles that blew up and boom, had these big audiences, Radical Heights and whatever else, and then all of a sudden just immediately disappeared. And that's because, like, Twitch, in the same way that it can rise you up, it can bring you back down. If the Twitch audience abandons your game and it's known as like the Twitch game, like your audience just kind of almost automatically leaves. Developers have talked about this, especially MMO developers have talked about this in regards to like paying streamers to do like streamed content, is that they say that they increase sales, but a lot of that sales gets either like refunded, or those people don't end up being repeat customers. They just leave. So it's like, it's almost like worse in a way, because they scale up thinking they're going to have this big player base, everybody leaves, and then all of a sudden their infrastructure is just like too much. It costs too much. They're not making enough money. I'm not saying, again, any of this is about Apex Legends per se, but just saying, like, whenever we analyze numbers like how well a game's doing based on popularity and sales, like especially online multiplayer games, you have to be cognizant that statistics isn't just like a snapshot of something. It's usually like a study and deliberation over time, you know. Like people take time to go through that and analyze the statistics. Sorry. I think did somebody sub earlier? I think I missed that one. Oh, Lines. Thanks for subbing or resubbing. Why doesn't it say it says subscribe, but it doesn't say resub? Anyway, I appreciate the resub. Okay. I think that's enough Apex Legends talk. Like I said, if you haven't had a chance, go play the game. It's free. Why not? Right? Why not play it? It's free. I mean, you can go play the characters you want to play, earn the currency and purchase the things if you want, skins or whatever else, but none of that's really going to affect gameplay, so we don't need to talk much more about Apex Legends. Go play it if you haven't already. Alright, now this was a topic that I definitely wanted to get to, and it kind of made me think about old school Star Wars games, of course, just because of the headline here, but check this out. So to set the story, set the stage, Disney announces that it's never been good at video games, so it remains happy with EA's recent work. Now, for those who don't know, EA back in 2013 got, like, I think, was it a 10-year license or something like that? It might have been a 10-year license or an 11-year license. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had like an 11-year license or 10-year licensing deal with Walt Disney over the Star Wars IP, specifically in regards to making video game rights, exclusive video game rights. So this obviously has run its course now for some time. They've had these rights for about 6 years. Of course, EA operates SWTOR, Star Wars The Old Republic. It operates the mobile version game. What's that? Galactic something, whatever the hell, microtransaction game. And then, of course, there's other Star Wars games like Battlefront 2 came out and didn't do so hot. The Fallen Order game recently was canceled, so there's that one. Are they still... No, they're still doing the Fallen Order one. They just canceled the other one, the Project Ragtag one, which I don't even know what they were calling that at this point. Anyway, that was just a little bit to kind of set the stage of where EA's been at in regards to Star Wars games. Now, Disney, you know, essentially they said that, here's a quote right here. "We're good at making movies and television shows and theme parks and cruise ships and the like. We've just never managed to demonstrate much skill on the publishing side of games." And so, to some, like, this probably doesn't mean much at all. This is what triggers my inner fanboy. I'll put it that way. That statement triggers my inner fanboy because it's almost as if you went to, like, France, and let's say, like, you went to, like, the best restaurant in France that was known for making the best bread possible. And you went there and you took over as chef. And the first thing you said whenever people were like, "Hey, the quality of your bread has kind of gone down, man. Like, what's going on?" And you're going to say, "Well, you know what? I just acquired this company. The bread kind of seems good enough for me. I was never really good at making bread anyway." So, you know what I mean? So, you shouldn't really have an expectation that I would make good bread. Do you see, like, how absurd this is? First off, the Star Wars franchise obviously has existed for some time now, since the 80s. Or 78? I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, the video game Star Wars franchise, or IP, if you will, that realm of Star Wars has been existing now since the late 90s, but blew up in the late 90s, more specifically in the early 2000s. This was the age of KOTOR. This is the age of TIE Fighter. This is the age of Jedi Academy, Jedi Outcast. That other one called... is it Rebels of the Empire? I can't remember what that action-adventure game is where you play the smuggler off the top of my head. Oh, Empire at War. There's that one, the RTS game. That's a good game. Is it Shadows of the Empire? Yes, Shadows of the Empire. Thank you. Shadows of the Empire, another great game on 64. Am I missing other good Star Wars games? Battlefront, the original Battlefront 1, the original Battlefront 2. So I'm listing a bunch of Star Wars games that most of us can say are at least pretty decent, if not great games. Rogue Squadron, another one. Dark Forces, that's another one too that my girlfriend loves talking about. Point being, there's been a lot of great Star Wars games, right? Like, if anything, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had a plethora of Star Wars games that were great. Like, a plethora of good Star Wars games. What's annoying about this statement to me is here, Disney comes into the picture, purchases the rights to Star Wars, and then gives EA exclusive access to making Star Wars video games. And then whenever people are basically like, hey, we're not happy with what EA's doing, they tell everybody, EA's doing just fine, because honestly, we don't really do that well with video game IPs anyway, or publishing. And it's like, yeah, but we did before. Like, LucasArts, you know, problems and all, and, you know, I'll never forgive them for rushing out KOTOR 2. But LucasArts made some pretty damn good games, okay? First off, they pioneered the adventure game genre, which is already a thing in itself. But they also, as we've mentioned, like, LucasArts has published some really good Star Wars games. So the annoying thing about this to me is that you have another publisher essentially taking over the reins and basically telling everybody, like, basically farting in everyone's face is like what this was to me. Like, the equivalent of this is like, they just let one loose right in front of me, and they were like, dude, it's not that bad. It's like, well, I mean, it smelled great before, now it smells like shit. And I'm not okay with this. So no, it's not just because it was like, you know, great before and now it's different, and that now it's just different because now it is how it is. It's like, no, like, when we talk about classic MMOs or classic games, we don't talk about classic games because we're like, oh, we want everything to be the same. At least anybody with like a brain, anybody who's rational doesn't want everything to stay the same, because it needs to like grow and learn from its mistakes and innovate, right? But the reason why we always talk about classic games, and like in this case, like classic Star Wars games, is in the case of like old Star Wars games, they were really good games. And so when we criticize Battlefront 2 for its microtransaction problem, when we criticize SWG for its like, I don't even want to go into the laundry list of problems with that game, and we criticize these other Star Wars games like that crazy microtransaction game that they have, that Star Wars microtransaction game where apparently you can spend like thousands of dollars on characters or something like that, like Nihilus, and they put all of the KOTOR characters into that and ran that through the cash shop. Point being is, like, we have an expectation. Galaxy of Heroes, is that what it's called? We have an expectation of Star Wars games and what is considered Star Wars quality, at least in video game realm. Like, I know the movies, people are mixed on that, but generally speaking, we've made some pretty damn good Star Wars games, and I mean we as like a fandom. Like, you know, the Star Wars fans have made some damn good Star Wars games out there. Disney coming in here and just being like, EA's doing just fine, man. This is just scary to see. Like, if you can't tell, like, I'm pretty bothered by this because I'm really afraid to see what the future is going to be for the IP. If they think that EA is doing just fine, are we never going to get the other Star Wars games that we want? Like, are we going to get another Academy kind of game? Like a game that pushes the envelope in terms of lightsaber combat? Are we going to get another Empire at War? Like, are we going to get another Battlefront? Like one that actually has galactic conquest? Not galactic whatever the heck they call it in the new one, and it's not even close to the same thing at all. It's like a mini version of it, and they try and call it the same thing. Yeah, are we going to get another Star Wars MMO? One that's actually massive multiplayer online game? Star Wars, guys, it's not looking good for the Star Wars IP in the realm of video games. So, I wanted to bring this up to everybody because, for us OG Star Wars fans and OG video game Star Wars fans, we might have reached the point where it's going to be some time before we see some good games again. Because EA has the license at least until 2023, 2024 at least. That's another 4 or 5 years from now. So it's just, you know, we're going to have another 4 or 5 years of basically no Star Wars games. And when they do come out, can we even trust them to be anywhere close to good? I mean, at this point, probably not. Hey, what's up? UMO-ified. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and transition to the MMOs on the go segment, and before I get into some of the points that I've outlined here on my little chart for myself, I wanted to talk about Star Wars Galaxies in particular. We didn't even mention Star Wars Galaxies when we were talking about good Star Wars games. And that was because, specifically, I wanted to get one of my moderators, Ludens, to join me while we talk about and try and quantify what Star Wars Galaxies was to fans of the MMO genre, but also just the Star Wars genre in general. I mean, I don't talk too much about nostalgia in here, simply because it's one of those things where it makes you want to get stuck in the past, you know? And like I'm not the type of person who likes to get stuck into the past. But there is just something great about remembering why those older games were as good as they were. Are you gonna join chat now, Ludens? Just join podcast channel whenever you're ready. Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up, man?
I had you turned down or turned up before.
Uh,
All right, so I'll ask you the question first. Like, well, let's just set the stage. Star Wars Galaxies came out in 2003. When was the first time you got to play the game or heard about the game?
the first time I actually got to play the game was there's this shop in Denmark called Bo and ID, and I think I played it in 2003. I'm not sure actually, but I remember going down to this place with my father, and I remember seeing the big box, the Empire Divided box that had the big open cover with the Velcro where we could open and you could see this big thing, right? And it was either that game or Jedi Outcast. And at the time, my dad had no thoughts of what an MMO was or subscription fee and all that other stuff that would come eventually. So I picked Star Wars Galaxies because it had the coolest box that I've ever seen. So that's pretty much when I picked it up, and I played it from 2003. I think it was late 2003. I'm talking like December maybe when I picked it up.
It's so great to hear that story because it's so similar to other stories I've heard before and my own story. Because I also saw that Empire Divided box with like you could open like the Velcro on the side, and it showed like they had that one that came out during I think it was right after they implemented Kashyyyk.
Rise of the Wookiees, yeah.
Yeah, was it Rage of the Wookiees?
Rage of the Wookiees or Rise of the Wookiees, I can't remember. I think it's Rage actually.
That's the first box that I actually purchased. So I played the game in a trial early on, probably 2004, and my PC at the time didn't have a 3D graphics card. So as you can imagine, I couldn't really play the game. So I put a graphics card myself that I found somewhere into my computer, like, you know, haphazardly or whatever else, and then I managed to play Galaxies for the first time on like toaster level settings and everything. But I remember a similar story of my parents were like, "Wait, you have to pay monthly for this game? Like, I thought you already bought the game. Like, why do you have to keep paying for it?" And I couldn't explain to them that it's because like it's an online world. Like, there's like people on this world. Like, I met this guy from, you know, Montana. Like, they're like, what? Like, nobody had a frame of reference for what that was. Like, whenever I was a kid, for sure.
It was definitely a unique experience. It was my first MMO that I ever played, and it took us a while. We had a family account first, and I actually got a Rage of the Wookiees account when I split up with my brother, and that's actually when I got my own account. And I also had a potato PC at the time, my own, so I had to spend some money to get that up and running. And space for me in the start of the game was actually pretty bad. I had an ATI card or a too bad processor, so when I shot a ship, it wouldn't register the shot, so I couldn't really play in space. So
I had the same experience. I didn't play space either early on, simply because like I would lag every time someone shot my shields. So
yeah. I had the same experience. I flew around in the CE-95 and I was shooting a freighter ship and it did no damage. And when a guy shot me, I instantly blew up. So I had to find something else to play. So I decided I was gonna. Well, I kind of role played in the start, but I was too young to role play, and my English was not good. So I had to find something else. So I decided I wanted to PvP, and I wanted to have a Jedi too. When I saw my first Jedi, I think I saw my first Jedi in mid 2004, and when I saw my first Jedi, I knew instantly that I wanted to make a Jedi, but I didn't know how. I didn't know why I really wanted to make a Jedi. But I mean, I saw the movies and I was young and I loved the prequels, so I wanted to make a Jedi. And I think I was that crowd that the game also targeted when they wanted to make the Jedi class more accessible, because of young kids like me not wanting to play the creature handler or the master merchant or the architect or all the other classes. So yeah,
I think it's funny that after all of these years, the NGE is obviously probably the most like horrific letter acronym that you could possibly or like mention or utter to anybody who ever played Galaxies. But you and I are weird in the sense that we played NGE. So like we're one of the few Galaxies fans who actually kept playing the game and played it through various changes. And so we have a little bit more perspective, I feel like, than some of these other fans, because like I noticed early on, like the reason why I came up with the idea for Death of a Game was because of Galaxies, obviously. It was like I couldn't understand why the game did what it did. And so I had to figure it out. And my videos are old back then in horrible quality, but my passion was definitely there because I love that damn game. And when I went back and observed it, what this kind of taught me, and we've talked about this before, was like people remembered these updates, of course, because of like particular things that made them emotional or whatever else, and so the nostalgia. But in a lot of cases, like old school fans who are so nostalgic, they forget a lot of the bad shit that's present early in the game as well. And so it's like, again, from our perspective, again, because I know we've talked about this, like we're people who are like, yeah, like I played the pre-CU and I played CU, but I also saw the flaws of those games as well. And I got to play the NGE and I saw the flaws of the NGE, of course. No one will shut up about them. But at the same time, there are some good things that it does as well.
I think, well, my brother is also working on a combat upgrade emulator, so he's not really looking at NG. We both played NG, and we played on a PvP server, and we ran around in rest just like everybody else. And I was part of a guild, and we uploaded our big fights and all that stuff on YouTube and all those classic guild memes. And I really loved NG actually. Well, I loved Combat Upgrade, but Combat Upgrade was a really short period in the game where you couldn't really experience Combat Upgrade before it was over, basically, because Combat Upgrade came out and then Mustafa was pretty much released right after, right? So, and the combat needed an upgrade, and Raph Koster also talks about that in his Postmortem, is a series on his website, right? He basically says that the combat from the start of the game, it wasn't working as intended, so you needed to upgrade the system. And it's tough when you're seeing something successful like like the other types of games that were out there at the time. So you had to kind of change it, but not change the core philosophy of how the combat should work. But it kind of worked, in my opinion. I really liked the combat, even though it was not that balanced, and a lot of things had to be changed in order to make it real time and not the combat queue up system where you try to knock down the same guy and pretty much do some ludicrous combos where you read online like you got to press the knockdown button 3 times, and then you got to press the dizzy button, and then you got to do this and that. And
I have to say, like, sorry, I was gonna say, on that same vein, what like the Galaxies thing is, it has to be like, I don't know, like, to ask you personally, it has to be probably the most obvious experience I can think of where you know, in my case, and maybe in your case, you feel the same way, that I've had a lot of involvement with it, but then I've also seen other people talk about the game, and it's almost in some cases they talk about the game as an idea, whereas I remember it as the game because I was playing it all the time, and I was there at the end. So I don't know. Do you ever feel that way? Like you feel like some people just remember the ideas, but they don't actually remember the details of the game, because people say so much wrong shit like all the time about Galaxies. Like they say, when I, you know, no offense to this guy that I met, but I met some dude at the PAX Unplugged, and he was telling me about Galaxies, and I, of course, played dumb, like I didn't know anything, so I was just asking him questions. And he was telling me how there was permadeath in the game for the Jedi and all of this stuff, and I was like, it's funny, because a lot of people think that, but Koster himself said it wasn't in the game. They never implemented it.
Yeah, it was basically an idea, and I think people get caught up in the ideas.
Isn't that
of
crazy?
the game. Yeah, pretty crazy, right? I mean, permadeath could have been a great solution, and I think, well, when you look at the game, and Raph Koster also said this, that they had a lot of wrong metrics in the game, had a lot of wrong metrics where they made the wrong decisions, and they looked at the metrics of, oh, how many Jedis are there going to be? Oh no, there are not going to be a lot of Jedis, so we have to change the system. And when Star Wars Galaxies lost its most amount of players in an update, it was actually because they ruined the bazaar system, the auction house, if you want to call it that.
Right.
They looked at how many master merchants there were in the game, but they didn't look at how many shopkeepers there were in the game. And so they looked at, okay, we got this many merchants, we can pretty much shut down the bazaar system and have people go out to the shops instead and be a part of the world. And it was a great change in many aspects, right? But they kind of forgot how many people actually used the system, and it caused a giant drop in subs, and it was the biggest in the game. And you can also see that with WoW right now. Like, World of Warcraft uses a lot of wrong metrics as well. They look at how many people engage with some content and not the enjoyment or the integral part of the game, like looking for raid and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe that is intangibles. It's like you can't really like intangibles are like that thing you can't really explain, but it's just like it's something about the game that people like. For example, like in EverQuest, that was an example of a game that had too much downtime, right? But
Yeah.
Galaxies was a game, in my opinion, that had you know, once you got past probably, I don't know, maybe the first 2 years of live, it didn't really have that same level of downtime. And if anything, downtime in Galaxies is, you'll hear people talk about it all the time, but it was kind of like the thing that people liked the most.
I love downtime.
Yeah, in a weird way, because it was like, for people who haven't played Galaxies, in Galaxies you had entertainers, you had doctors, and all throughout the iterations of the game, you had these different, I think it was medic before they called it a doctor, but it was doctor first, and then it was medic, the doctor profession, then medic class, I think is what they did in NGE, right?
Yeah, they pretty much merged the things together. The doctor was, you know, the big guy where you had the cyberkinetics and all that stuff, where you had to get it removed and you win and paid and all that stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, what was I saying before that? I forgot.
Well, there were entertainers and there were a lot of other...
Right. Yeah. So the big part of the game was coming together at these like cantinas or at the spaceport and getting buffs, and you would ask people, "Hey, I need this kind of buff. Hey, I need this kind of buff." Whatever whatever your kind of class was, and that was a huge part of the game. If you didn't do that, you were considered like an utter noob. Like if someone saw you out like PvE and you didn't have like an XP boost on, and you were like not max level, or someone saw you with like I don't know, you didn't have energy regen or some shit, and you were a bounty hunter, they'd be like, "Are you kidding me, bro? Like, do you even play the game?" So everybody did it. But because of that, it became this like amazing place for social activity, because everyone's there and they have to be a part of this ecosystem, because the entertainers have to give people buffs and the doctors have to give people buffs, and they get money because people tip them, and you remember all of this stuff. But that system, even that great system that was great at one point, can become problematic, and that was kind of like the thing where people love talking about downtime and Galaxies, and it was certainly great when it's great. But as you and I have talked about, games like that whenever technology gets introduced, have problems whenever people start botting all of it. And it's like, that was the thing that sucks about doctors and entertainers, is that they were great ideas, but they're kind of like too easy to bot. Like, you know, like there wasn't enough interaction. What if we could do like a more interactive entertainer?
Yeah, they kind of tried with the combat entertainer, but it didn't really work out right. They kind of reduced the group size when NGE came out, and then the entertainer was pretty much left out, and the combat entertainer tree, whatever you want to call it, it kind of fell through because they couldn't do enough damage and they couldn't do enough stuff to outweigh the normal entertainer buff. So you pretty much dropped the class right on the floor, and officer was kind of dropped on the floor as well, because you botted the officer, you botted the field medics, and you botted the entertainer, and you pretty much only had spies, bounty hunters, and commandos, and you had Jedis, and pretty much everyone else was left out. So it was pretty sad. In some cases, I had an officer, and my brother and I we pretty much shared accounts, and I used my account pretty much. I had the officer, and he used mine to bot when I was offline, and yeah, it was common practice if you wanted to PvP and you wanted to be one of the best on the server. So,
and that makes me like wonder, because I some people's argument to that then is that because the system can be exploited, and like for example, as someone who's, you know, a big fan of Galaxies, I'll ask you a question I know you've been asked, and I know I've been asked a million times, and that's like, oh, but you know, Galaxies worked back then because the internet didn't exist, and because there was no way that you could ever look up anything on the internet, period. So like now, if Galaxies came out, even with newer graphics, it would fail because everyone would figure out everything immediately. What's your kind of opinion of that kind of criticism? Because old school sandboxes get that criticism a lot.
Well, you create your own content. I think theme parks have a way worse time when you data mine the games, because that's like developer content that you data mine and that you figured out before it arrives. A lot of sandbox content is player made content, and that's way harder to data mine. The stuff that you can data mine are some of the base structures in the game, and they're not as integral or important to the progress. Other than the Jedi. The Jedi data mining was obviously really horrible, but other than the Jedi data mining, I think it's overstated and it's not really that big of an issue. I've played a lot of Sandbox in my time, and I've looked for my Star Wars Galaxies fix, and I've always used websites and all that
Same.
stuff to gather some knowledge about the game, but I don't see it as, you know, game ruining.
Right,
ruining the experience of discovering something new.
I think that's a bit of the strange thing. It's almost like people who say that are people who didn't experience it, and yet they're the ones telling us who did experience it that, oh, as soon as like these other websites are introduced, you're not going to enjoy any of that. It's like, but Alakazam existed when I was on the PC.
Yeah.
Like AIM existed. Like we had chat rooms where we would talk about how to get your like Mustafar crystal or some shit. Like people, it's not impossible to figure this shit out. Like we could have figured it out back then too. It's just that now, as you said, that the market's become like so theme park. It's like if you data mine something, you can completely like finish a raid. Like you have such a massive advantage compared to other people. But it makes me wonder if they don't just immediately answer the question, like that question, with sort of what you said, in the sense of like, well, it's a sandbox game. You have a lot of things that you can do. You're not really as reliant on the developers. I feel like that's because that statement has been like air quotes for a while now. Like a lot of these MMOs, they say that they're a sandbox, or they come out with like the idea of being like sandbox, but they don't actually have the tools. Like I want to ask you a simple question about Galaxies and like kind of tie it together, but like, what's your opinion of why like Galaxies was good at like giving players tools? Like explain like the sandbox of Galaxies.
Well, the sandbox of Galaxies was a coincidence, really, when you think about it, when you hear Raph Koster or Blair. And Blair is the producer of the game when I played. He was the producer from 2003 to 2006. And they had a lot of blog posts about how they kind of created the tools and the systems, but kind of didn't. they wanted to put a lot of things in the game. They wanted to have quests, and they wanted to have an overarching narrative, and they wanted to have this Galaxy Civil War where they had all those content updates, but it kind of fell flat. And over the course of time, it was put in the hands of players, and instead to live out the Civil War, and they put a lot of things in place. They had the cantina, and they had the role-playing servers, and once they created the player cities, and when you could set up your own base, you could make your own rebel base, and you could make your own imperial base. And then, well, on my server, Europe Chimera, we discussed on an IRC chat basically where we wanted to create our content with the other faction, and we said, okay, we set up this base, and it's located on these coordinates, and we can have a fight there on Saturday at, and we kind of made our own Galactic Civil War. We had our own.
We did the same
story,
thing. And we used to tie it into space sometimes too. And that was actually when I could fly around in space because my computer got better by then. But we used to do like an event in space, and then we'd land and then do the event on the ground. And you'd already be flagged, so it was awesome. Like it was like nonstop fighting. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Like the Sandbox genius in Galaxies really is just, it's accidental. It's like, that's the thing that cracks me up is I get comments all the time, even today on the videos that I made about Galaxies, where people will say, I just don't think you understood the genius of it. And it's like, well, I don't think you understand that the genius is that there wasn't genius. They basically said themselves, we launched the game early, we didn't have enough content, we didn't even have space yet. And yet people were already finding ways to extend their play sessions despite them necessarily not having more content to do. And, obviously the vendor system, the crafting system, all of these different things helped create play styles for other people who just weren't combat professions. But that's the beauty of it, right?
The housing is some of the best that's ever been in an MMO. The housing, the guilds, the player cities, and all that stuff. Nothing comes close, in my opinion. So there are a lot of different venues where you could be creative and you could do other stuff, and that kept me playing for. Well, I pretty much played from start to finish, basically. So,
and it makes me think then, like seeing like. Raph Koster is obviously, he's still kind of involved in game development, but he kind of does like consultancy mainly now, from what I've seen, right?
Yeah, he had a consultancy role with what's that game called?
Crowfall.
Yeah, Crowfall.
Yeah, I think a couple other ones too.
Yeah. So they kind of ask him for what's your opinion on our social system, or what's your opinion on this and that, and he gives his advice, but he's not really a part of the development, and he's not putting his foot down and saying it's gonna be like this and that anymore. So it's kind of sad. His last game he really worked on was like 2006 when he was still working with Sony.
Which I kind of can't blame him. I feel like he's maybe been a guy who has been like an unsung hero of the genre, because everybody remembers Richard Garriott. Like, everyone remembers the guy who coined the term MMORPG. Everybody remembers, Richard Bartle, the guy who came up with, like, Killer, Achiever, all these different categories. Like, people remember some of these other, Mark Jacobs, of course, Camelot and Warhammer. I don't feel like Raph gets that much, like, from the hardcore as he does. Trust me. I mean, you and I big him up every chance we can, but I definitely don't think he gets as much respect. And I feel like it's because he actually is a designer and, knows design very, very well. Like, you can go to his website, raphkoster.com. I think I posted the link already, but he has a particular article that I wanted to talk a bit about today, which was what drives retention. But he has tons of other articles like this and free content that people can go read on his website. And there's so much knowledge here from somebody who obviously was involved in early creation of MMOs. But the interesting thing to me about Raph is that how come there hasn't been more people who've tried to create similar ideas? And what I mean is, like, is the genius of Galaxies a mixture really of just coincidence, but also the genius of someone like Raph Koster? Because it's strange that we haven't seen more Raph Kosters, is what I'm trying to say. It makes me wonder if just because of how things ended up shaking up with these publishers essentially taking over the industry, maybe creativity has kind of been stamped out. But why haven't we seen more Raph Kosters, I guess? Why haven't we seen more Galaxies?
I think the Raph Kosters were made in the mid '90s during the mod era, and people who really experienced mods also have a profound respect for the role playing aspect and the core essential MMO stuff, other than just creating the next big thing, right? That wasn't Raph Koster's MO. He never wanted to just, okay, what's the trends out there? I want to make the most popular game. He wanted to make a good game, a well designed game that he felt all right with. And when WoW came out, and I talked about Blair before, he's J. Allen Brack, who's the CEO of Blizzard now. He moved on from Star Wars Galaxies, and he went to work on I think he worked on TBC or Wrath of the Lich King. I think it was TBC, and that's just a different generation of people who never experienced what mods were, or what the creation of the MMO world really was. And I don't see a Raph Koster coming along again. I guess. Because the theme parks are too popular and people want to emulate what's popular now, and it's quite sad. I mean, when you go to a publisher and Blair, J. Allen Brack, he actually lent his house to Raph Koster, and a bunch of the guys in the early days when they were figuring out the concept, pitch Star Wars Galaxies, and their pitch was so different from the release game because they had to rush it and a lot of things were left out, and they were funded to create a game that had questing and that had defined classes and that had this and that, and instead they put out a game that had a lot of missing components. And it's just a big coincidence, right? You can't go to a publisher now and basically say, we want to create something that's not appealing to the masses. So I don't see it coming, other than from a guy that's been a big fan of Sandbox games in the past. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's like Galaxies, pound for pound in terms of its price per amount of enjoyment and copies it sold, it did really, really well. Like, I mean, it was a commercial success, as Koster himself says, by far, right? I think he said himself that it cost like
1/4.
Yeah,
1/4 of the World of Warcraft budget.
That's what I was going to say.
It was incredible to think about that. It's 1/4, and it actually almost reached, I think, 1 million subs in the first couple of years. But it's also a Star Wars IP, so it obviously gets a bump from just being Star Wars. But a lot of people kept playing as well because of the retention rate. So it's not a coincidence either. The game was actually good, and you had a lot of systems in place that could keep people playing pretty much for the foreseeable future when the game was out. So
yeah, so asking the question generally of like, can we see another Galaxies? I do kind of agree with you that on the surface, no, like you're not going to see another one. But what if we like break it down to just one particular system? Like the one in particular that just drives me crazy is the crafting system. Like, how come we haven't seen another Galaxies crafting system? Are people just not willing to copy it, or are they just can't figure out anything else, or is it just really they don't think it's that important?
Crafting over the years got less and less important, but it seemed that a renaissance in some ways in the newer released MMOs, and I think crafting has become more popular over the years. But I think we're going to see a better crafting system than Star Wars Galaxies in the future, but I don't see it copying it directly. I think it's going to be inspired a bit by having all the different, the shipwright, the artisan, the merchant, pretty much a crafting class, but crafting specializations as well. So you can't just make a generic crafter that could craft all the stuff in the game, because having a shipwright in the game that you had to go to, and you wanted a shield battery, or you wanted new cannons or missiles, or it just diversified a lot of the crafting in the game instead of just having a single go-to guy that could create everything. You had to
Right.
move out, and you had to go to their shop, and you could barter for the prices, and the quality was very the quality of the items varied, and you could get a good piece, you could get an okay piece, and you were still competitive even though you couldn't get the best crafted items available. But you needed crafted items, and it was an integral part of flying ships, and it was an integral part of getting good armor and composite armor and
Everything that I can think of, basically. Like, the beauty of the crafting system to me is just simply reverse engineering. That to me was like the coolest aspect about it, is that they found a simple solution to how do we get rid of 10 plus 1 belts in my inventory without having to just sell them as junk or just throw them on the ground like in most MMOs. I mean, the guys behind Galaxies were like, well, why don't we just allow you to reverse engineer, get that +1 skill out of there, and then potentially reverse engineer it again to maybe get a higher upgrade or combine it with another piece of armor or whatever else. Like, that's another crazy thing, is it's such a basic salvage system that we haven't seen like copied before. It's strange to me.
Worked amazing. And when you were a farming mission terminal quest, right, when you were running around on Tatooine killing dewbacks or whatever you were doing, right, when you killed a lot of hot dogs or wherever you were farming, reverse engineering was a great little piece of feature in the game that actually made you want to keep on grinding. And you had the potential of getting really good items that you couldn't put it back into the crafting system instead of just going to a vendor and just selling them for scrap credit. And scrap credits could just flood the market with, well, a giant number of credits pretty much coming from nowhere. So right. I really like the scrapping system. And in WoW, you pretty much see, sell junk buttons where you just go, sell junk, and then you get some gold. And I think it lacks variance, where there's no option. You go up and you sell all your junk, and there's no system or anything you can do about it.
It makes me think of those old school crafting players. I'm sure you've encountered one of them before. I used to know a guy. He was a billionaire in Galaxies. This guy had multiple accounts, multiple master professions, multiple trading professions that were master as well. Architect. He did ship engineering. He did what's the other one that he did? The creature handling as well. He sold all these different things, and he made so much money because back then, you could sell pets for even in the older terms of economy for essentially like 1 million credits. Like, I mean, they were always expensive. Pets were always like a huge thing. Nowadays, as in like NGE. Pets are like 55 mil if you want a 55 point pet. So like every point these days, you would like pay a mil for it. But I mean, back then obviously it wasn't as crazy. But anyway, this guy was a trade mogul, right? I think about this guy and I try and imagine him playing any other MMO. And the sad thing is like, it's not a whole lot of MMOs that exist for this guy. And I think that sucks for like being like the crafting guy. Being the crafting guy, I know tons of crafting guys, and I talk to some of them whenever they play games like Albion Online or Legends of Aria, some of these newer kind of trying to be classic games, and he's like, these just aren't the same. Like, the crafting in here is to build the same thing over and over again and then sell it. Like, no one cares. Like, you can't actually win. You know what I mean? Like, you can't win at crafting. And you see that in Galaxies. I know people like this. They were winners, man. They owned all the resource generators in one given area. Like, they sold every piece of armor you could imagine, and they were damn good at it, and they dominated the market. And that's what they deserve, right? Because they worked hard, and they worked for it. But it's like, in WoW, do you see that same level of crafter? I haven't seen them, and that's a shame, I think.
Crafting was incredible, and you had a limited amount of resources too. So you had a resource war going on between the different merchants, and we had a lot of crafting guilds where you basically had different factions of crafters trying to get access to these materials, and they had to kind of team up with other guilds, and you kind of got this, where you had a battle for resources and a lot of PvP, world PvP going on, because where you had a planet like Locke, where you could get a lot of ground medals for armor, and you had to fight for the medals. And if you didn't fight for the medals, you basically lost the galactic war. So it created a lot of incentives indirectly to have world PvP. And I don't see that in World of Warcraft. I don't see that in anywhere else, where you go to an island or you go to battleground or whatever, and the fighting is not really integral to the world. And Star Wars Galaxies had none, and I've not played a game that's had that since.
Yeah, it's like I postulate, and I want to interview Raph at some point. And in fact, I'd love to reach out to him. But in this particular like realm, I want to ask him the question of, does he think it's a matter of it's too expensive to do a sandbox right, or it's just too difficult to get the funding to do a sandbox right? It's probably either one of those. Obviously, money is a big issue these days, just simply because everybody thinks that if you don't massively advertise your game, it's just going to outright fail. But also, there's just so much competition on early access and Steam and some of these
Kickstarter MMOs.
Yeah, Kickstarter MMOs. Yeah. There's so much. There is a lot of things happening, and it makes me think of. I don't want to be the first to say that nobody's trying to implement some of the older systems, because ironically enough, Mark Jacobs himself has said that Galaxies has the best crafting system and is trying to implement that in Camelot Unchained. So I mean, someone is taking notes out there. Like, somebody paid attention, but is that sustainable, and is Camelot Unchained going to be the one that works? Obviously, like, we don't know, but man, there's just so much uncertainty, but it's fun to look back at Galaxies and feel like I'm looking at the answers in some cases,
Definitely had a lot of it had a lot of answers, but it also had a lot of questions, and that's also why I looked up a lot of differ for game type videos back in the day, and I found your video because I was wondering, right, why is the legacy of Star Wars Galaxies a game that had these great features and these great systems, and they're nowhere to be seen? Nobody has copied any of the systems. And temporary flagging and the flagging PvP system was also amazing, right?
I would
flagging
say so.
PvP was amazing. The crafting was amazing.
There's technically 3 factions, which has not been seen in some time when it comes to GCW. You could fly as a neutral pilot, you could fly as a rebel pilot, you could fly as an imperial pilot. Like, it was. So there's not a lot of games that have neutral factions. Not to mention early Galaxies, every profession made money. Like, that was the cool thing about the game. Every profession made money. Entertainers made money. Doctors made money. If you were a smuggler, you made money through selling spice and stuff like that. And you had to make sure that you didn't get caught, because you would get ID'd and you would get attacked by the guards. And then the bounty hunter obviously did bounty hunting. It seems like, to me, when you look at Galaxies, the simple thing that it did right is that it actually took its world seriously, if that makes sense. Like, it took the world seriously. When Raph and his team looked at Galaxies in someone's apartment, basically, as an idea, and was like, how do we come up with this? Obviously, they probably had way more they wanted to implement, as you said, they've said before. But they probably thought of, like, how can we create a world that seems like a Star Wars world, right? And I don't know if current day MMOs, period, really think about that in the same way, because it's just like, when you play games like ESO or Black Desert Online, 2 games in particular that I have quite the ire about. Those aren't really my favorite games. It's not because of the games themselves, it's because of the fan bases around these games. They're just like, they act like there's no problems with these games. It's like, first off, in ESO's case, it doesn't play like Elder Scrolls. And second off, the world doesn't feel like Elder Scrolls. And what I mean by feel, let me really like expound upon that. I mean, like, when I go into that world, do I feel like the laws and lore of the Elder Scrolls universe is being upheld? Hell no, dude. You can spawn in the Altmer zone as a Dunmer. Like, in what Elder Scrolls like universe could you just do that and it'd be okay? Just like me firing like fucking fireballs around and shit around a bunch of Altmer, who, by the way, are the non-cursed version of my race. So, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much reason to hate each other And then in Galaxies, the beauty of that kind of game is that it didn't have a lot of that. People had to create it because there wasn't any lore. But now that we know that that can work, I'm with Card, who says this a lot, but he says, like, it's hard to get people to be creatively driven. And I agree. And that's why, like, I think you and I kind of fall similar on here, but feel free to disagree with me if you do. But when it comes to, like, how you innovate on the sandbox model, I'm not against doing tutorials or storylines or quest lines or anything like that's seen as being more theme park or like closed circuit, if you will. I'm totally okay with that stuff because that stuff, in my opinion, is necessary to bring the casual, theme park fans over to the sandbox side. Like, you have to kind of spoon feed them a little bit,
I'm not a purist in any type of way, and I don't want to be a sandbox purist. And when I first started the game, and I just stood there in Mos Eisley, and I saw a guy with composite armor and a big pit to the cost of $1 million or whatever credits, right? I had no idea of how I started to play the game. The only thing that you had was you could tag yourself as being a new player and you needed some guidance. That was pretty much it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you need some sort of introduction to how the game basically works, right?
You literally get spawned into Mos Eisley, have no idea what you're doing, and you see like a bunch of womp rats, and you're like, hey, I'll just go attack these, and then you immediately get killed, get clone sickness or res sickness, and now you're like, okay, so I'll go try and kill another one, and then you immediately die again. That's most people's experience playing Galaxies early on.
Yeah. So I want some sort of hand-holding, at least for the first couple of levels. I don't see it as good game design just to throw a player in there because it's the correct sandbox experience to have the player.
I totally agree. I think that's become a gimmick almost because it's lazy. Like, you hear like some developers say like, we wanted a traditional, like a true sandbox experience, and so we dropped you off in the middle of nowhere with fucking nothing and no idea of what you're doing or who you are as a person. So there you go. You can, and then whenever you ask them, okay, so like, what can I do in this game? And Legends of Aria, by the way, was bad at this, but they had no marketing, like no hook. And what I mean is, like, whenever you ask people like, hey, what do you do in this game? In Galaxies, I could tell you a million things to do. Like, I could be like, oh, you could be a trader and look for resources, or you could join the GCD or GCW and on the side of the rebels, or you could be a pilot, or you could, like, there's so many things I could say. Whereas I feel like in that kind of scenario, they're just like, oh, you can do anything. Okay, like what? Anything.
And also, Star Wars Galaxies could take a lot of liberties because it was based in the Star Wars universe and it was pretty close to the Star Wars universe, so you had some sort of idea of what was going on in terms of the story and in the timeline and all that stuff. So you didn't really need a lot of handholding in terms of story or the universe or all the characters, but you needed some handholding in the terms of how the systems worked and how you're going to progress and what the different trees were and how many stuff you could combine brawler and you could combine medic and all that stuff, right? You weren't taught that. You had to pretty much ask players, and if they weren't being new friendly guys, they were just gonna say lol, nope, and then just would run off
or
basically.
Ignore you. That's what they would do to me most of the time. They would look at me, not say anything. That was like the ultimate sin in Galaxies. It's like they'd turn their character, like their shitty animation character, like looking at you while they'd be walking, and then their character, like they do that moonwalk thing in Galaxies, they walk forward. They'd look at you, and then they'd just walk away, and you'd be like, "Damn!" You'd feel like you were like skipped or whatever the term is.
You type to the guy, and you obviously didn't know how whispers or tell worked. You just walk up to him, and then they target you, and then they just walk off basically. And I kind of did that when I got experience in the game, and I think about that time a lot where I put on the new friend helper, and I pretty much stood there in Mos Eisley and just scoffed at all the new players spawning in, right?
I think
so. I was part of the problem too.
No, but the funny thing about that is I was as well. I think that's part of the problem with these sandbox games, don't you think? Is like, because we braved it on our own, that's why we're the fucking worst when it comes to new players. Like,
Yeah.
like meaning like because you and I survived, exactly, because we survived when it was difficult. I became elitist as shit whenever new players wanted to join, because I was just like, you guys are gonna quit anyway. like who cares about y'all? But then obviously now growing up and maturing somewhat, I same thing as you. I look back and I think, man, like I kind of was like a douche to newer players, when not necessarily being mean, but just not being as helpful when I needed someone to be helpful for me. And so it's almost like the curse of a sandbox game. Because we're tough and fucking resilient and we survive in like Eve or Darkfall or Galaxies, we're less willing to be nice to people.
But I do have some nice, friendly player experiences. When I first started playing the game, and I remember running into a Rhodian guy who basically taught me everything about the game. And he invited me to a guild, he gave me some armor, he gave me a weapon, and he pretty much told me, you want to progress your character by doing missions, and you go to a mission terminal and then you type in chat you want to do some missions and basically grind, right? I do have some nice experiences, but my personal experience when I was put in that role is that I pretty much didn't want to teach other players how to play the game. But I don't think, as a sandbox, it's quite lazy to just put everything in the hands of players, and you're going to get those situations where new players are feeling left out.
Right. And then also to clarify for people, we were children when we played MMOs. We were like, you know, I mean, the first time I ever played an online game with other players was probably like either Habbo Hotel or like Diablo 1. And I mean, start contrasting those two games as you can possibly imagine. One of them, you're like talking to each other, being friends. The other one, I tried to PK my friends whenever they'd go to level 3 in the dungeon. So, point being is we were young kids, but looking back now, it is just funny to think about how, for some people, the struggle becomes part of the game. So, like, for them, they're just like, you have to struggle through it, and that's just part of it. Darkfall used to be notoriously like that. Oh, the game's too hardcore. I'm getting ganked when I walk outside. Lol. That would be the response of the Darkfall forum. Lol, get shit on, kid. And then they wonder why no one plays the game anymore. Or they wonder why new players don't want to join the game. And it's because they have no way of being kind of like thrown into the game without, like, basically they have no knowledge and no guidance in any sort of way. Like you, I was lucky. I met a guy who, unfortunately, I cannot remember his name, but he had a alt account named Darkbow. So I do remember that name. And he was a Wookiee. He played as a Wookiee, and he was one of those guys who had like 4 accounts and just loved playing the game. He was not a tryhard. Like, he didn't have 4 accounts because he min-maxed. He had 4 accounts because he wanted to play 4 different classes. he had an extra account because he wanted 2 different traders. Like, he was one of those guys. And I remember he was like 45. He told me one time he was like 45. And I was on comms with him as a kid. And my dad walks by and he's like, "Is that a grown man?" and I was like, I guess, but I didn't know how old he was at the time. I was just like, I guess. I mean, because I was a young kid who played with adults all the time, so it wasn't weird for me. And so I'm like, I don't know. And so I asked him, I was like, "How old are you?" And he's like, 45 or 48 or whatever he said. And then my dad's like, "He's older than me." But it made me laugh because back then, without the internet, without Galaxies, I don't know if I would have met people from other countries in the same way. I wouldn't have met older people. I wouldn't have met such different perspectives. Like, that's what MMOs, especially Galaxies, taught me. Is like, Galaxies was the first time I got to meet with Europeans, because they would play on Starsider a lot of the time, because Starsider was an RP server. Even though it wasn't an EU server, it was an RP and a space server. So we had plenty of Europeans on our server. And, you know, playing and interacting with them was always strange, because obviously I'm not European. And I'm European blood for damn sure, but I'm not from Europe. There's obviously so many different countries. There's so many different countries, and I mean, you're a good example. You being Danish, like I met my first Dane when I was playing Galaxies, No, sorry, Warhammer Online. Warhammer Online was the first time I met a Dane. And of course, as you could expect from a Dane, he was a PvPer.
Yeah, sure.
And then when I started
Classic
playing,
stereotype.
right, when I started playing Darkfall, though, that's what like Darkfall as an MMO completely changed my perspective of the world. Because in Darkfall, I met the Chinese players. I met the Russian players. I met the Finnish players. And let me tell you, the Chinese players are like Chinese and Russian players will stop at nothing to destroy you. Like
They're diehards.
They will, like, I played with a Russian guild, all Russian players, and I played with them because, you know, one of my friends, as you know, Adun, he's a Ruski himself.
Yeah.
More specifically Ukrainian, but so I'd play with them, and what I liked about playing with the Russians is that they always made things happen. They always got into massive battles in Darkfall and like sieged people at like 5 a.m. for no reason, just because they'd go up to a clan and be like, "We're gonna take your city," and if the clan was like, "No, you're not," they would just immediately declare war and be like, "All right," and they'd set up the siege to attack you like the next day. They wanted to create conflict in the game because there's nothing else to fucking do except fight in Darkfall. And the Chinese players would sell gold to other players, but they would also set up deals with us to protect them. So like the Chinese players would be like, "All right, as long as you protect us, we'll give you 10% of whatever we sell. Like we'll give you like the gold and stuff." So these different cultures were acting in these different ways. But then of course I met the Finns, and you know, there's not a whole lot of Finns in chat. We have a Finn moderator, Anbu, but and Anbu is totally the opposite, by the way, of what stereotypical Finns are like. He's way too nice and kind. But my experience with Finns in that game, of course, there's Finstack. Most people who play MMOs have heard of Finstack if you know of Finnish guilds. And we had guilds like that back then. We also had, I can't remember their name, but we used to call them Mitsubishi because they were some strange Finnish name that we couldn't pronounce. It was like Mahaga something, like some crazy name like that. And so we would just call them Mitsubishi. And those guys were crazy, man. Like they were very bloodthirsty. The Finns would be the type of person, like, if you killed them at a goblin spawn, they'd show up at your house with like 20 dudes. Like they'd be ready to like take you out. Like if it was a matter of like, you can't take anything from us. And anyway, it was just fun playing MMOs and getting to experience all these different cultures and perspectives from other people that I could never otherwise meet. Like, how would I meet these Finnish players in real life as a young kid? Like, I was, you know, not rich or anything. I couldn't travel, so there was no other way except online MMOs, and I think that's why they have such a special place in my heart.
That's why I also hate region locking a lot. I know why you want to region lock, and sometimes the Chinese players are gonna exploit the gold making system, and they're gonna ruin the server economy and all that. But you lose a lot of the essence of MMOs when you try to region lock and you log out NA and EU players from playing with each other. Or you make an EU West server and then you separate it from EU Nordic or whatever you want to do, right? And then you lose a lot of that stuff that makes an MMO where you kind of meet a lot of different cultures. And I was definitely part of the Danish, Swedish, Norwegian guilds that were pretty toxic and PvP'd a lot, right? So, and in Warhammer Age of Reckoning, I met a lot of guys too, and I met a lot of North American guys because they were the ones primarily playing the game, and a lot of English guys as well. So, I wouldn't have had those experiences if I started playing ESO or other games like that. But I don't know if that's because something has changed in the ways I pursue online relationships in that way, or it's because the game just lacks the urgency of having to team up.
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's probably like a combination of a bunch of different things. I never thought about it though until you said it there, but it does make me wonder, like, for these players who grew up playing the current, I guess, flavor of MMOs, I feel bad because I think of them and I'm just like, man, you guys didn't get to experience what I got to experience. And like, I don't see that as get off my lawn. It's just more of like a sadness. Like, I wish you guys could have experienced what I experienced. Because, you know, through hearing Ludens and I talk about Galaxies, and we talk about Galaxies all the time, but just these different things where it's like you look in the marketplace and it's like there's so much, there's so many things to still satisfy that aren't being satisfied. But I mean, of course, all of these other considerations, money, support, engine, all this other stuff is a big reason that stuff is kind of slow moving. But I'm with you in the sense that I believe mega servers should be the future. Like, I don't believe in regional servers. How is it a massive multiplayer online game that's supposed to have a global reach and supposed to be another world? Like if I'm playing Galaxies or if I'm playing WoW or whatever game, if I can't even play with somebody from like a country, I don't know, maybe even just across the pond. Like, to me, what makes a game massive in scale and idea is the idea that when I would play Darkfall, the beautiful thing about playing Darkfall and why I still have a positive memory of that game despite many of its issues is because I got to meet German players. I got to meet Finnish players, as I said. I got to meet Danish players. I got to meet so many different kinds of cultures, Russian players, Chinese players, like that I otherwise wouldn't have really met or interacted with. And now I think about if I was born in this age and I tried to play ESO and have those similar experiences, and it's just like you can't when you're locked into like US West East or or US East 1 or US West 1
but I do get like the Australians obviously can play on like a US server with like 300 and 400 ping and be like competitive and all that, but I do think that it should not be the end all be all that every region should have their own server and you are not allowed to switch over. Like you could switch over in SWOTOR, you could pretty much switch over to NA and you could switch over to EU and make an account, like no biggie, right?
Right. Yeah, and publishers used to be particularly bad at that. I remember when I covered Spellborn Chronicles, the publishers in that particular case didn't even want people from other regions to play together. Like, they literally would region lock you. It's like, like, what? Why would you region lock someone in the UK from playing in, like, I don't know, Norway? Like, is it really that far? Like, what's the ping difference? Like 20? 30? It can't be that big of a difference. It's not that far from each other. So it's like, in that particular case, it was weird that they would, separate it so much. But I'm with you in that Australia is one of those kind of unfortunate countries in regards to their ping, where if there isn't oceanic servers, they kind of get railroaded. Either 180 ping in some cases or even more. Like, they can go up to like 250s and crazy shit. So yeah, you certainly you do need to take that into consideration. But it also makes me think more so about if we want to create these grander combat systems. It makes me wonder, how long is it going to take before we can play this like super, graphical, but also great performance and fun, playing game, but also play it at a massive scale? Like, when are we really going to get to that level where we can play what we play in an action game at the scale of an MMO? Like, we have to be like 20 years away from that, right? 30 years? I mean, we're a ways away.
It's going to be interesting, and it's gonna need like a monetized system where you can make money, but not in a wrong way that changes the game. But the publishers and devs need money to iterate and do all the things to the game. But you need to have all these grand systems in place and a big budget and all that stuff to make investors and all that happy. So I don't know when we're going to see it, if it's going to be in 10, 15 or 20 years, but I don't know what the plans are. And I think the progression in MMOs really changed when Titan was scrapped and changed into Overwatch, because it seemed like that game had a lot of the right ideas and a lot of the right ideas from Star Wars Galaxies in particularly. Especially in the consideration that the entire thought process of the game was it was the actual world. You played on the world, and then you had the different daytime professions, and then during the night you change into the the proper action combat class that you had picked. And I could see that being a lot of the same dynamics that they were used in Star Wars Galaxies, where you had to make money in order to be competitive, and you had to farm your profession, and then during your other half in the game, you could be in space, or you could PvP, and you could arrange all this stuff, but you had to participate in the crafting and in the cantinas
it's
and
an
bots and all that
ecosystem,
stuff.
right?
Yeah,
Like I know it's weird to use like that, like scientific term, like, you know, biology term, but it's like it is like it's like an ecosystem, you know, like whenever something dies in the environment, it gets decomposed. First off, like something eats it, right? So the predator eats whatever it is. Then, you know, it gets decomposed by a bunch of different types of bacteria and whatever else, you know, fungi and stuff. And then that gets put into the ground, and then that feeds the, you know, the roots, which, you know, gets brought back up to the earth in the form of water, which goes through trees, and then, you know, rinse and repeat. Like trees drop seeds, and it's like that's like how it works in the real world. And it's no different really if you're trying to create an actual virtual world. You have to create it like an actual ecosystem. There has to be checks and balances and a reason that everything is connected. Like, when are you ever going to get another experience like waiting for your shuttle to come pick you up in Galaxies? You know what I'm saying? Like, that kind of experience was awesome because it was like, if I couldn't afford a ship myself or I didn't want to drive, I just took a shuttle. And it's like, I can't think of any other game that I take a shuttle in to get somewhere, you know? Like, that's just crazy to me.
And just to shield Raph Koster one more time, his postmortems or his Fury of Fun books, they go into great detail of how he designed the living society and the ecosystem that was in Star Wars Galaxies to great detail. And a lot of those things are like great thought experiments, and it has to have taken a lot of thought and a lot of time to create these systems. And yeah, I just hope that the thoughts and all that live on, and the ideas don't die, and someone out there is gonna pick up a lot of those ideas and put them into a game. Like, at some point, there has to be a guy that says, "This is what an MMO should be," and
right.
he tries to get some funding and he creates a good game.
Well, like, even like let's like divorce ourselves from the current market. If we're just two people, like, remember being a kid here for a second, who just want a game that's like can play as your imagination can imagine. I know we've all thought of this. Like, anyone who plays MMOs has thought about, you go to sleep at night and you're like, man, imagine if I could actually load into the game and play as like a Jedi. Like, how cool would that be? Everyone's thought of that. VR, you know, augmented reality. This has always been an end goal with MMOs. And that to me is like the craziest thing, is that we've gotten so far away from that, but people don't even see it because they're just caught up playing whatever is, you know, currently popular. But they don't see like the systemic issue. You know, they don't see it that because it doesn't have an ecosystem, we're never going to be able to get to that length, or, you know, that depth of a game is what I'm trying to say. Like, am I going to be able to load in as a dude and go through like the trials of becoming a Jedi? Like, imagine that as a game, like how cool that would be. But then imagine a theme park game. Do you think a theme park can offer that same experience? It wouldn't be able to, because you would just do one mission and then all of a sudden you become a Jedi. They hand you your lightsaber, just like in Galaxies and NGE. They hand you your little training saber, right, with your crystal when you load into the game, and you get your little like profession pack. Remember, they'd give you that little pack whenever you switch your profession?
That was so fucking oh my god, dude. That's a lot of bad memories. We talked about a lot of good memories, but that's a bad memory.
That is a horrible memory, because it's like imagine there's something in life that you want to do so much, like you know, go through, like, if I remember correctly, you're working in you want to be working in law, right? Or you want to be involved in law. So, you know, you want to be this whatever type of hotshot lawyer. Now just imagine that, but then just imagine that somebody's like, well, actually you can't even be anywhere close to that. You're only going to be this, like, you know, bastardization version of it. And then now that you know that's essentially your ceiling, how are you going to think that you could be anything better? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if people look at the market right now, it's hard to see what could be, because we're just like, man, it's kind of boring right now. It's kind of stale. But it's like, I still try and remember what I thought of when I was a kid, which is that idea of like, imagine if we could just load into a world and I could just, you know, shoot womp rats in my backyard and and sell their skins for extra coins or whatever else, like, or credits. Like, when that game comes to realization, the MMO industry will take over. I'm telling you, like the MMO industry will be the industry in the future because automation, right? You can automate a lot of different things. But can you automate human interaction on a deep level? Right now, not really. So that's our biggest thing going forward in order to not be gobbled up by robots. So by that, theory or rather I should say hypothesis, I'm willing to say that that is going to be the future. Is that we can make, virtual reality the standard of it, like MMOs. What can compete with that? You know what I'm saying? Like, can an action game with a contained storyline compete with that? I don't know.
Can the tab targeting system beat that?
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. And I'm talking a little bit of nonsense, but just because we got in our nostalgia bag today, I wanted to also remind everybody that there's a lot of like cool ideas and great things that are still out there that aren't being used that already existed before. So it's just like, I know we have to be patient for someone to kind of put all of this together. But don't forget that sense of like, wonder that you had as a kid, because it still exists. But if you keep trying to play the games these days the same way that you played those old school games, it's just not going to work. You have to accept them from kind of what they are. It's like with ESO, when someone asks me, is that a good game? I'm like, I mean, it's good within its confines. Like, it's good at like what it does specifically. But I mean, is it what I deem to be a good Elder Scrolls game? No. But I guess as long as it's believable and it works within its premise, it seems to be working for people right now. But I just want people to still look to the future. Like, there's so much more we can do with this industry. Don't sell yourself short. And it was nice talking with you about Galaxies today to get that fire going in terms of like that passion of what MMOs can be,
Yeah, it's been great, man. I love talking about Star Wars Galaxies, obviously, and a lot of the good old nostalgia and the good ideas that game had. And I want to see more of that in the future.
And I really think that's just the best way to put it is, there's not a whole lot more you can say about that. I think Galaxies was a great game. It was a flawed game, and it was a beautiful story to watch unfold and watch, covered after the fact by the guy who essentially designed the game, was lead designer of the game. But man, it really does open your eyes to just so many different things. Like, think about like the topic we had today, just talking about Galaxies, how much discussion it creates. I mean, because there's like so many thought experiments you can have, like role play. We talked about that. We talked about new player experiences. I mean, we talked about how when they changed the vendor system as well as the XP system, the group XP system, those are like the biggest reasons that the population in Galaxies started to die. It wasn't
huge change.
Yeah, it wasn't the NGE. Like Koster himself said that, and yet even though I kept telling people that in my Galaxies video, nobody believed me. They didn't go read it from him himself for some reason. Anyway, yeah, it's been nice talking with you, man. It's been a minute, so I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking with us, and we hope to have you on again some other time. We can talk about some other game.
Yeah. Definitely another game. Still love Star Wars Galaxies though. Yep, see you.
All right, see you later, Ludens. And everybody, please thank Ludens for stopping by today to join us on the podcast. That was a good chat. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move the... Actually, I'll do one more little section of the MMOs on the go, because I kind of forgot to mention this earlier, but... I saw something pretty funny, and it's sort of related to what we've been talking about already. But it's specifically in regards to how MMOs look in development after a certain amount of time and how Kickstarter projects look and that whole shebang. So here on my, sorry, I put it on screen. There's some guy named Dev Dude, like whatever his name is, doesn't really matter, but he's working on a game called Arn More. And obviously, don't know any details about this game. Not even trying to advertise or tell you guys that it is a good game. But I wanted to watch this video for a simple reason. In this, he says himself that he's working on his own MMO and that he is essentially a one-man army working on this project. I wanted to show you guys what a one-man army can essentially do when it comes to developing an MMO. And I want you guys to use this as a standard going forward when looking at other tab target, Kickstarter clones or whatever else. Just like, think about this. This, to me, looks more complete than the vast majority of Kickstarter projects I've seen. And this is a single guy modding and sorry, designing this himself. I think we need to start holding developers and publishers a little bit more accountable whenever it comes to them introducing ideas to us. Like, ideas shouldn't mean anything to anybody anymore. What should mean something is that promises of properly implementing ideas. And so, meaning, if somebody is trying to tell us that large-scale PvP is like their goal, but they can't even show us a test with like 1,000 people on screen, then I don't need to believe that their idea. You see what I'm saying? Like, their idea, even if it is their idea, it's not actually what's in the game. And so what I love about showing this kind of gameplay is like, here's a guy who isn't focusing on the fluff because he can't. He doesn't have the resources. So he's literally only focusing on things like, say for example, running around with animations and attacking things. I mean, isn't this crazy to see like what we can come up with when we're not trying to like basically market that we're making a good game, but actually work on making a good game? I mean, look at the combat here. Like, it's not amazing, but I've seen worse combat in other games that have $1 million Kickstarter projects. I mean, he actually got AoE combat there, so it's not even it's not a complete tab target system, meaning he actually has some form of action combat in this basic ass gameplay. He has projectiles that can fire from a bow. Is this some great game that's going to revolutionize the world? Probably not. No offense to this guy, but what it does demonstrate to me is the simple thought experiment of, imagine if you yourself had some level of experience in you know, whatever type of engine you wanted to use or language that you knew, C++, whatever else. And imagine you took all of that into just trying to make as simple as an MMO as you possibly can, with a focus on a small world, as he says here, and what you could come up with. And then imagine like these other games out there who have Kickstarter projects, and you essentially look at their trailers and it's just like, what are they selling exactly? It's so hard to know where the lines are with so many of these games. I just wanted it to pull up a list, typing in MMO Kickstarters just to see what came up. Okay, blah blah blah. Project. We've covered pretty much all of these. Those are really none of the ones that I wanted to go into. But anyway, there's so many crowdfunded projects out there. There's one announced every week on the MMORPG subreddit where it's like, oh, Super MMO 5.0 is coming out, and you know, please give us up $1 million as our goal. And it's just like, they don't have anything to show for. They're essentially completely asking you for money based on an idea. So can we just stop giving people money based on ideas? Maybe actually like evaluate them off of like what they actually are supposed to do, like not just what they say, but like what they promise to do. Vincent ADK basically puts it best: just give me money. Just give me the money, bro. I have an idea, so give me money. Don't give the other guy with an idea money. Just give me money. But it's just absurd. Like, we need to raise our standards on what's considered like good, playable, and something that we could feel good about advertising to people. But at the same time, because there's a scarcity in the market right now, people are far more willing to deal with shit, with bullshit, you know? Like, look at Bless Online. How did we even tolerate Bless Online, period, let alone for a week or whatever we tolerated it for? Like, there were people who were literally shilling it to their audience. I'm not going to put any names out there. Shilling it to their audience and then saying, just kidding, it's a shit game. But you could have known that already if you just watched the game. If you just tried playing the game like one single time, you would know. Bless got lucky because a lot of people were ignorant about it. That's a good point. And ignorance usually gets you screwed when it comes to your money. As Jim Sterling says, it's not enough for them to get the money. They have to get all the fucking money. It's a shame. I didn't know much about Bless, right? And so whenever these other people were like advertising the game, I told you guys I wanted to be a thank you, Rainy Tide. Yeah, I wasn't literally asking for money, but I appreciate that. I appreciate the bit donation. But it was like, when I wanted to play, I wanted to be a part of their launch because I knew it was going to be a clown fiesta, but I also wanted to evaluate it for myself. immediately upon playing the game, as you guys saw on stream if you were there, I couldn't even play the game on my 1080. Like, it wouldn't even run properly. And I'm like looking at this thing and I'm just thinking to myself, like, how could anyone sell this to anybody else and feel good morally? Like, how could these other guys do these advertisement videos where I played the game in Cali and it looks great, guys, can't wait for it? Like, how could anyone sell this to anybody, dude? Money, money, money. Basically. I lucked out because a good Russian friend of mine played Bless and told me to say, oh yeah, I guess a Russian friend would know about Bless since they failed in Russia already. It's a shame because, like I said, when you're at a point of scarcity in a market, you're a lot more willing to deal with bullshit than you would otherwise be, willing to. In the particular case of MMOs, though, because these are so expensive and these crowd-sourced and crowd-funded MMOs need our assistance, meaning not big publishers, there's nobody to hold them accountable except us. So we have to hold them accountable. That's why I talk about it, because nobody else is really going to hold them. There's no like MMO, fairness board or something like, the MMO non-pay-to-win board. Like these don't exist. There's no regulations. So it's like whatever works, they can get away with. So we have to stop letting them get away with this. Bless was lucky because the sheep follow the herd and nobody forms their own opinion. Yeah, that's true. I would say Lawbreakers was a bit of a victim of that as well. There's a couple games that get more of a bad rep than maybe necessarily they need to because of the mob, but there's also games that justifiably get the rep that they deserve, as well as, those who maybe, in the case of Bless, needed more of a negative rep surrounding it than it deserved, or than it got, because it deserved a lot more. What else did I have to talk about? Oh, we can talk a little bit about that Raph Koster article I mentioned briefly, and that was the one concerning how to go about player retention. Now, I'm obviously going to be adding this to my repertoire whenever I talk about this, specific point of analysis in the future in regards to player retention. But Raph Koster, he basically postulates that the best ways to keep consistent users coming in is a number of different ways, but this one in particular, steady content trickle. He says the pros of this: consuming content as you move through a system can be very compelling. Fortnite does this very well. It could take the form of defeating, collecting, plot advancement, or more. It gives a clear aspirational goal for the session, and likely for the next session, and can hold people as long as the content keeps rising or ringing changes on the basic mechanics. The cons of it are they are expensive, very expensive. People underestimate how expensive. If you are solely dependent on this and miss an update, you can actually lose your audience. This is a point that I've made so many times that it does bewilder me that people don't pay attention to this advice. Which is like, if you're trying to focus on a steady content trickle, aka a theme park-based MMO needs a steady content trickle, it's so risky because if you release one bad update, you can GG your audience overnight. I think these are some graphs that he illustrated to kind of show what he's trying to explain here, which is like new users are the darker bar here. Active users are the red bar. And then this little bit blue up here is the registered users. As you see, new users come, active users decrease over time. But this one says it has active users between 100% and 10% churn instead of, it doesn't say how much churn this one is.
Hey, thanks. But you've got the wrong.
But anyway, you can clearly see that here.
Shooting people, cracking wise, and pretending to know how to fight with my hands.
Thanks for the Twitch Prime sub, Rainy Tide. I appreciate that. Other things that he mentions are persistent profile investment, a familiar approach that is easy to implement, usually via RPG style mechanics. Even piling likes to even piling likes into a profile counts here. Okay. It's basically about having a persistent profile that accrues over time. Leaving would mean the loss of accrued value and, more importantly, the standing in a community. What he's referring to is that essentially if there's more community presence and a real community present in your game, there's more likeliness that you'll have more retention, which, obviously is not a quantum leap in logic, but it comes obviously from somebody who knows better than just about anybody else in regards to MMOs. So I'd be willing to listen to his opinion, even if it sounds little bit simple, but like the real community prominence is more valuable, as he says here, than the level number proxy that you give. If the player can move to another setting that retains that prominence, this may not serve as a retaining anchor. Interesting. So meaning if it's not a matter of like, if there's no aspects in which you can create a community, maybe he's trying to say that then community itself doesn't anchor you just because you reached max level. You actually need to create a real community prominence, I think is what he says. He also mentions in-world investment, building and housing. Now, this is another obvious, great example that he himself knows better than anybody else, because he, of course, was behind designing some of the systems at Galaxies, which is known for some of the best crafting and housing system, period, in any MMO ever. Pro, this is what save games in building, or this is what saves games. This is what save games and building games do. That's a weird way to put that, save games. Anyway, unlike character investment, which can be sort of portable, this can never leave the game. It is also even more powerfully, or it's even more powerful if collaboratively built, because it then implies also building a set of social ties. For example, a city. For example, a village. For example, a house, right? It serves as an outlet for a couple other methods as listed below. The cons is it's expensive to design and implement, it's data intensive to store, and it introduces a host of design challenges around space, public display, and more. For example, in Galaxies, people would basically not pay their taxes, which would allow their house to kind of sit there for a little bit, so they had to introduce a tax system to basically make it to where you couldn't just lock down a plot of land by never using it. You had to at least pay the taxes on it. Other things he mentions, but anyway, that one's pretty obvious. Like, obviously, if you have more housing and more permanence in your game, it's probably going to elect more loyal fan bases. Look at WildStar. The only reason why WildStar even had a population before they were going to shut it down, like the past 2 years, was basically because of its housing system. So it's like a really good example of that. Social connections such as teams and guilds, that one's pretty obvious. I mean, obviously. Social groups are the primary glue, as he says, in games in general. This one just goes without saying and also kind of piggybacks off of his persistent profile investment. Economic play and arbitrage. Now, this might happen with real money or might happen with play money, but the profit motive is incredibly powerful and will keep players engaging in your experience well past the point of actual enjoyment. More reason to have a good crafting system. If you want to have good economy, you have to have a good crafting system. He talks about the cons are if you're using real money, it can chase out more playful ways of engaging, and that it requires a robust set of systems that enable trade, sales, and so on. Dynamic virtual economies are much harder to design and balance than static ones, and that one goes without saying because there's been a couple economists who've written books about MMOs before, but in order to have a good MMO economy, it legitimately has to be a good economy. Like, that's kind of the funny thing about it, is that in a vacuum, it might just seem easy as like making certain values, whatever else, but they legitimately have to come up with a good economy because it's like a real economy, essentially, whenever it functions in that way. Obviously. Have I watched Travis Day's discussion on MMO loot? I haven't. He also talks about extreme game depth. Of course, this goes without saying. StarCraft he uses as an example, which is a great example. StarCraft, I mean, even if you've played the game for, like StarCraft 1, I played for probably like 13 years or something like that, on and off at some points, but at least for 4, 5, 6 years, like consecutively. I still find enjoyment in playing StarCraft. That's how much layers there is to that game. Player versus player competition. I mean, this was proven by Mark Jacobs. And I feel like he should reference Mark Jacobs here because they did a study on this themselves that I talked about in my Dark Age of Camelot video, where essentially they created a game that was just an arena game, but was based on factional warfare that was like a overnight success and continued to be a long-form success for the company. That's kind of where they got the inspiration to create Dark Age of Camelot in the first place. Was based on like that small little example that they showed that if you just increase player interactions in forms of combat and increase lore and give them reasons to maybe assign with certain factions over other factions, you create player conflict, which keeps your game running. User creativity, that goes without saying. If you have a great crafting system or a great building system, people are going to love to pour insane amounts of resources and time into creating awesome things. Minecraft's a perfect example. Story is an interesting one to put here, but let's see what he says. This retention tactic of soap opera, emotional engagement, typically with characters and not plot or setting via ongoing narrative. Okay, so SWTOR basically does this now. This is one of the only reasons people probably still play a SWTOR. Emergent play. This is probably one of the most misunderstood mechanics in MMOs, period, but it's something that I hope to kind of explain more, in another video, I mean. But emergent play arises at a systemic depth, simulation, and etc. Usually interacts with the game breadth as opposed to depth. Don't think about having one chess system, think about having many smaller systems that are individually not as deep, but when they interact with each other in surprising ways. But which interact with each other, I should say. It can be surprisingly cheap to implement a system like this. But it can also be brutally hard, he says, particularly to balance. This is a perfect example to me of how good ideas don't mean you have a good game. Because, like, for example, the pro is a good idea at the best case. This is what it does. This is what a steady content trickle does at its best idea. But here is it at a bad implementation. That's what the con represents. For example, expensive, right? Or persistent profile investment. If you don't have a community to display anything to, then you can't do that. In-world investment, it's expensive to design and implement, as well as, you have to keep running that data and store that data, as he explains here. So this is like a perfect example of how an idea can go wrong and go way wrong, because every con here that he lists is something we've seen in the market. That's the crazy thing. All of these mistakes, we've seen them represent themselves in the market. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting article, and I think it's one that people could study for sure. I'll watch this link. Let me go ahead and switch it to the call-in segment. So now if you have any questions for me, go ahead and @ me. If you'd like to ask me on Discord, it's going to need to be shorter than... I'll give you guys about 16 minutes to ask questions. So, meaning keep the questions a little bit briefer if you're going to ask them in voice, because obviously voice discussions take a little bit longer. But you can just @ me in chat, and I'll try and go over any questions you have or concerns or whatever else. The first one that I'm going to get to is just this this one that HJ Smash kept trying to post, which is one apparently about a guy named Travis Day, who's done some type of lecture concerning how to gain loot, I believe. It's the man behind loot. All right, well, we can't watch all of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, you might be wondering, who is this guy? Are we talking?
Oh, so Preach is
working for Blizzard.
He's that
This is 2017
sorry, he's that content creator that does WoW videos.
eating reward. So they focus on making that game a very steady progression, and he will go on to.
By the way, me personally, I don't have any issue sitting through long videos. Obviously, I make long videos, so I sit through long videos all the time. But I'm not gonna play a 30-minute video on a stream. First off, I've already had copyright issues with that before. But
people
anyway,
want to feel rewarded whether they play for an hour. Or
I don't think Preach is gonna
but
copyright strike me. So
hence
okay.
why the Paragon system was brought into Diablo, because loot was so hard to get at certain points that was worth getting that people could play for a whole night, 2 nights, 3 nights, not get anything. So the Paragon system was what was justified by the over-justification effect. It's like we could still say something like they still gain Paragon levels. That is fully transparent in Legion, the artifact power system, right? So you can see how these systems go hand in hand. Yeah, you didn't get an upgrade tonight.
Some of you may or may not be familiar with.
Okay. So this is the Burning Crusade, as you can see.
I think that I can kind of already postulate maybe here what this guy's point's going to be. And maybe HJ can fill me in if he's already seen this, but it seems like his argument is going to be like, by making things deterministic in terms of like allowing for a badge of justice to be farmed and then purchasable, like you can buy gear with this badge of justice, this currency. Maybe he's going to make a particular argument concerning how it doesn't feed into the ecosystem, but I don't know. Curious.
Brings in the badge of justice, and some of you are going to go, broke it. This is what he believes was the detriment of this whole thing. So we're actually going to jump ahead a little bit here. Now, I truly want you to watch it. He's talking about they added badges to various sources because they couldn't really justify why they didn't have badges. So it's like the addition of badges of justice to Karazhan. And then the rate, because Karazhan loot was pretty bad. There are some things left out here, like Karazhan loot was buffed in order to be better, but simultaneously they added badges to Karazhan because why aren't they giving badges for Karazhan? And then the raiders were saying, well, why aren't we getting badges for raiding? Like, the gear's still pretty good. Like, why are we not getting badges for that? So they started adding badges
Slippery
to
slope.
everything. And what they ended up with was just nullifying that whole system because everybody was getting flooded with badges. And I'm going to play, this is the longest section of this I'm going to play.
That makes sense.
This is about a minute long.
Be like any streamer in just chatting section and just steal, react videos.
Was a disaster. Now, this will look very familiar to those of you who played during this time, certainly in Wrath of the Lich King. And the idea they aimed for here is that they had, in TBC, they had one universal currency, which was badges. But that worked for the whole game. So people were buying all sorts of loot. And it was a problem. They consider it a car crash. You consider it a complete disaster that they had this system. In Wrath of the Lich King, the solution to that system, and this is a running theme, and I think it's the big theme of this video, is Blizzard coming up with solutions to problems, right? So they figured the badges are a problem. It doesn't matter whether you agree or not. Blizzard believed it. Or certainly Travis did. That the badges system was too complicated. It was too silly. And then they came up with a solution for that. The problem that doesn't get addressed here is that the initial source of the problem disappears, but the solution to that problem remains, right? So you've put a solution in place to a problem that no longer exists, and that means that the solution you put in place is counterintuitive to the issue itself. So I'm going to play this 1 minute.
Guys who used to work on this with us, and my thought was, what the hell were we thinking? So this is what badge system looked like during Wrath of the Lich King. There were ultimately 5 different types of badges with 5 different vendors associated with them. And if you could find a badge, you'd have to go to a city and look for like, all right, which of these vendors is the right vendor? And you could downgrade badges in case you missed a set piece you really had to have. It was a train wreck. The whole thing was terrible. So we ended up with way more than we wanted, and ultimately, I don't know, I'm sorry. If you played through this, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I apologize. The whole thing was just a total phrasing.
Too many currencies is confusing.
So while we were working on all that,
that's obvious.
We kept getting feedback like, hey, these systems are better. You know, we fixed a lot of problems. Granted, this is 10 years ago us.
That's why like people try and mint the dollar or whatever Tom like
coming to me and saying, hey, I still haven't got my
chosen
set piece,
bit
really
of currency is for their country. It's easier to unite it under $1 instead of 16 different currencies or 100 different currencies.
Put the sets on the vendors too. Why not? We've got 5 different tiers of badges. You know, most players are going to be.
So you can see the roll of the eyes there. So I believe he's talking about Tom Chilton, who hadn't got his tier set or whatever, and was like, I've been farming this for ages, and I haven't got it. Can we put it on a vendor? And this then leads to this. I'm going to bring this image up for you here, because I think it summarizes it pretty well. Is the snowball effect. And this is where it all starts to collapse, because remember, what's about to happen is he's going to describe that everything became pretty much vendor-based. So this would have been around Trial of the Crusader. That's when tier sets and stuff.
I think I understand.
Like price tag to them. And they made loot feel like a paycheck. So you would literally be able to sit down and work out when you were going to get all your gear. Like there was no way of getting it any faster. This is when I'm going to get it. And therefore we just played along those rails. Yeah. And it took all the fun out of loot. I agree.
Your weekly
it's one of the reasons I really hate Dragonwrath from the Firelands. If you were part of a guild that was acquiring Dragonwraths for your guild, everybody had a set date of winning because it was all very deterministic on when it would arrive. It was not an exciting moment to get the legendary stuff. Like there's some excitement, sure, but it was so predetermined. It was so set in stone as to when that would happen that I think you guys will immediately be like, I'm interested in this. So he's going to take us back to vanilla to the Ultra Flash Shadow Reflector. I had this. Was tremendous. Could reflect fear and stuff. I had this on I think my rogue still has this in his bank. But let's hear what he has to say about
poor engineering,
what was,
man. Engineering gets such a bad rep because it had some great items.
And long ago in a land far away, there were actually items that were so completely untunable that we didn't know what to do with them. This is a screenshot of an old engineering trinket. Some of you may or may not remember this. This would allow you to, on use, reflect a spell back at the caster.
Okay, so the point is there, Blizzard didn't know what to do with these items. And in fact, he goes on to say that they were completely untunable. There was nothing we could do about it. So what was the problem with the Shadow Reflector? Well, his example is a little weak, I would say, is that some bosses did shadow damage, and the Shadow Reflector could reflect that shadow damage and kill the boss, which can be fixed in a number of different ways.
Roar War sort of came into existence, where we'd taken all the things that were interesting out of the game to make it more balanceable for us as designers. And the consequence was a player couldn't even look at any 2 items and figure out, well, which of these is better. We'd replaced things like 2% crit chance with 150 crit rating. Like, what does that even mean? I don't understand a rating. And the end result was no one understood anything, including the developers. Like, if you ask me, like, which of these is better, like, I don't know, probably the one that's higher level, but actually not, because I made it and I split it 3 ways instead of 2 ways. Like, I don't know.
It's so honest to hear him say this, though. It's so honest to hear, like, the guy who is essentially, you know, behind designing loot in WoW and has seen it over the couple of years, you know, the past couple of years, and what it was at first and what it became during Wrath of the Lich King. It's so crazy to see that when he talks about that snowball effect, he's absolutely right in that when you're balancing something in the middle of it, the only thing that you can think about is the immediate problem, right? So like you're balancing something, you're like, okay, someone says that this trinket is OP. So what can I do in order to fix that balancing? Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is nerf it. That's like the easiest thing to do in regards to balancing, but probably one of the most harmful things, right? Because then you can kind of end up making everything useless, and then people don't feel as powerful, and it kind of ruins the flow of the game. Maybe it increases time to kill too much. The culling suffered from that problem, where every time it balanced, it ruined its time to kill, and so it didn't understand that this little change, like speed on how fast you can shove, will completely change this flow of your combat. And so the snowball effect, it's just crazy to think a game at the scale of WoW that had no idea that by essentially changing the way that you gain gear, but also the way that gear is classified, would essentially take away many of the things that people missed and loved about gear in the first place, which was the fact that it was unique and that you did know what you were going to get. You knew exactly how much of an increase you were going to get. Like, conceivably. I may not mean necessarily exactly statistically speaking, because some games aren't the best at that. In WoW's particular case, when you saw that gold weapon or that purple weapon, you knew it was better than your green or your blue weapon. But then when they started messing with, as he said, 3 layers of skill, I guess, additions, like 3 different layers, that's when you start having problems, because you don't know if 100, you know, crit chance is better than 100 crit damage chance. Like, to most people, they don't really know, like, which is better. Like, how much of an increase is that really? People don't know the math behind it. The stream is getting kind of meta. A stream of a video of another video. I wish I could see this in the entirety, because I'm curious what he says about why they made it so RNG. Like, I realize they did make it RNG in some ways because they didn't want people to keep not getting the gear that they wanted. And so they added in these tokens as a way to allow you to purchase whatever gear you actually did want. Except the problem, of course, with the tokens is, well, there's a number of problems with tokens. Tokens themselves don't have any inherent value. They can't be sold or traded, which kind of is strange, right? Because it's not a real currency. A real currency can be traded, sold, and manipulated in some kind of way. They weren't giving us a currency, more like a token, which is kind of why they call them tokens. It's more like, here's a thing that I can trade for another thing. That at least gave you the ability to choose the kind of gear that you wanted. When WoW got rid of that, they almost completely relied on RNG, which is like basically saying, hey, there isn't any merchant because it's too complicated, aka they just wanted to make it not only easier, but arbitrarily increase the amount of time it would take to progress with gear. Because in order to progress, you have to subject yourself to randomness. And that's sort of like some of the big problems people are having with kind of how WoW is handling its current system. Bound items in form of drops that bind to your character cannot be traded to. Yes, but not all items are bound, right? So, like, yes, certain rare raid items were bound, and certain rare items, as well as in Galaxies. Most MMOs have some type of bind system, at least in some way, shape, or form. The problem, I think, with binding things is that, I mean, I really don't see a good argument for binding things, period. I'll be honest, man. I'm a true believer that everything needs to be able to recirculate into the economy. So with WoW adding a token system, My problem with it is that it's not a currency system. If they added a currency system, I wouldn't have as big of an issue. But with a currency system comes the ability to manipulate things. For example, if you have more money, then you could buy more currency of whatever type of currency you needed, which theoretically can make it to where people who can just spend money get the most kind of progression. That sounds problematic, right? That's kind of the problem of allowing people to kind of purchase or actually trade the currency. But at the same time, if you don't do that, then you essentially take it out of the ecosystem, which makes it something that's almost balanced on its own. It's not balanced in its total, like, how would I say? It's not balanced in its in a totalitarian way, like not completely all the way through. Like, it's not meticulously balanced, because, like, for example, if I have that engineering item that he used as an example, that can be purchased in the economy. Like, not maybe I probably won't be able to buy it at cost, right? Because no trader is going to sell me something at cost. They're going to sell it to me with profit, so they can make some money on it. But if I buy that in a game and I die, theoretically speaking, I lose that thing, which could then be taken from me. Except, once again, the problem in many MMOs is that when you die, not only do you not lose anything, although WoW used to be particularly good at increasing cost whenever you would die, meaning you would lose money. Same thing with EverQuest. In EverQuest, you could lose your entire corpse, which is far worse. But when you take away consequence and you take things out of the ecosystem, it makes it feel less and less like a world and makes it feel more and more like a game. So I find it problematic to not put the onus of creativity and of performance in the player's hand. And what I mean by that is that a player should be able to be such a good crafter, they create a really good piece of gear that's better than other types of gear. That's my personal opinion. Now, the way we can tie in a raid in order to fit that is that maybe by doing this raid, you get a resource. And you can only get that resource from doing a raid. So then, therefore, the raiders are also wealthy because they have a scarce resource that other people need. You see what I'm saying? Like, this, again, I'm not saying it's easy. It's very difficult to balance, especially a massive multiplayer online game that's already running. So in this particular guy's case, on the surface, it is easier to just make it RNG. It is. It's just, there's no way around it. That it's easier to make your game based on RNG loot progression. And that's why everyone keeps doing it. And obviously, it's only now, I would say, more so recently, that the community is starting to say, enough is enough. We don't want this anymore. Like, we're not okay with this RNG system. I don't think it's cool that I can play the same amount of time as my friend and I'm much better than him and he still gets gear faster than I do because it's random. And lose several levels. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we are back to consequence, aren't we? Every discussion we have about MMOs almost always ends up coming back to consequence. Anyway, do we have any other questions that I can get to before I leave? I'm getting hungry. I usually intermittent fast in the morning, so by around this time I start starving. Blacklight Retribution will close its server soon. Will you do a death of a game on it? Or do you have other games planned? So it's a bit of a kind of cop-out response, but it's going to be kind of the same response anytime that question gets asked, MGPT, concerning any game that's essentially not popular. It's that right now, if I want to do this full time, I have to cover essentially what's the most popular topic I can cover. Within my range, within my niche, of course, and within my kind of way of I guess giving you guys content. So yes, at some point we could do a video on Blacklight Retribution, but realistically, is it going to be anytime soon? I mean, it's just, I feel like it's more honest for me to just say it isn't. That all comes down to resources. At the end of the day, I have to make a living. So I have to cover things that are going to make me enough money up until we can get our Patreon to be our main source of income. Then at that point, I don't have to rely on popularity in terms of YouTube views, right, in order to pay bills. That's a working economy with incentive to crafting. Exactly, Teak. Not to mention, at any point, even if you're a lowly scrub player, you're always relevant in an economy-based game. Like in an actual living virtual economy, like in that kind of game, you're going to be useful no matter what level you are, because either you loot scrap that you can turn into something, or you loot a very like boring mob to kill that drops a really good piece of resource. So like the thing is like in those types of economies, there's always something to do, and there's always a reason to do something, because you always need more resources. You need more, just like in the real world. What makes people fight amongst each other? Scarcity of resources, and a bunch of other reasons, but mainly scarcity of resources. Ultimately, we as like a civilization we care about getting as much resources as we can and essentially like surviving, right? In many of these games, because the resources aren't finite, meaning once they're on you, there's no way to like get that like out of that player. Like it's almost as if like each player is like a safe or like a vault in many MMOs. You put things into them and it's just like you don't get them out. They don't come back into the economy in any way, shape, or form. And that's kind of the reason why, if you've ever wondered why I seem like biased against theme parks, that's probably why. It's because I support virtual worlds and virtual economies, because that's what I want the MMORPG space to become. I don't want it to be just in its game phase. That's chump change. Like being a game is just chump change. It could be way more than that. And I think there's no other questions, so I'll go ahead and use this opportunity to skedaddle. All right, I want to thank everybody for stopping by and watching me during this podcast. We got up to 36 viewers. I appreciate those who subbed today greatly. I also appreciate those who've asked questions. Ludens for stopping by, Card for helping us, even though he didn't really have to do anything today. That's good. He's too busy anyway. And yeah, thank you for those who started watching from the very beginning and those who showed up late. It's okay. I forgive you. I guess update in terms of content, what's coming out or whatever else. The Dirty Bomb video was supposed to come out this weekend. It's going to be coming out next weekend. And that's because I'm having issues with my editor in regards to like how long videos are. And the only reason why I even mentioned this to you guys is because the one thing I will guarantee to you guys, no matter what happens in whatever scenario, the series will continue to go. And the series, Death of a Game, will always be based on answering questions surrounding why a game or a company fail. And in order to do that, you have to build a timeline, just like an investigation. And in order to do that, you have to, get evidence and research and build a case. And that inherently means that those videos are longer. I realize that. Like even shorter lived games are going to have still 10, 15, 20-minute videos sometimes. But that's just kind of like the format. And the thing I'll leave you with today is that as long as I can tell the story, I'll put out the video, right? But if I feel like I can't tell a story, or I feel like it's too short to tell the story, then I'm going to make it longer. So I know many of you don't mind if I have longer videos, but I just wanted to let y'all know that I'm not going to arbitrarily make my videos any shorter. I'm going to keep them as they are, and we will create other future series that will appeal to more mass audiences. That'll be shorter form content. But Death of a Game is always going to be longer form content. Don't change anything. Well, I want to change some things. But anyway, thank you for stopping by. As I said, have a good rest of your day on Monday. I know it's Monday for those who are in America. You're probably still at lunch or working right now. And if you're in Europe or something, you're probably getting ready for bed. So have a good rest of your day, good rest of your night, depending on where you're at. Good rest of your week. And yeah, see you guys later. Thank you for stopping by. And this was episode 21 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. And I am Nerd Slayer, your host, signing off, I guess.